Listen up.
Welcome to the PowerShell Podcast, the podcast for PowerShell and the PowerShell community. And now, here's your host, Andrew Plaw.
Welcome to another episode of the PowerShell Podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Plaw, at Andrew Plaw Tech, and we have a very exciting episode in store for you where I'm going to be joined by friend of the podcast, friend of me, listener, PowerShell nerd extraordinaire. But before we get into that, I want to tell you about PowerShell Wednesdays. And that means every single Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern time in the PDQ Discord, we will be having a meetup. We'll be talking PowerShell. We'll be show and telling. I might get guest presenters. I think recently today I had Fred show up. I also had Jake Hildreth of Locksmith fame and all kinds of good stuff. So that's PowerShell Wednesdays every single Wednesday. You know what? I might see our guest there. Let's welcome him to the podcast. Mark Go, welcome to the podcast, man. This has been a long time coming. I've been trying to get you. You're here.
Happy to be here, Andrew. Gotta say, man, love your work. Big fan. I'm so excited and so honored to be here with you.
Oh, don't pretend like I haven't been asking you for several months. I've been asking you, but now it's been cool to see your journey as well. Sort of where you came from in PowerShell, and now you've really applied it. You've made new connections at work from what you've told me privately. Maybe we'll explore some of that. But before we get too deep into that, I want to hear about some of the cool things that you have learned in the past year. A couple of quick little hitters. Maybe it's a module that's been impactful for you. Just give us a couple little nuggets of information.
I mean, the biggest thing that's happening is obviously the AI stuff, right? Large language models. It's been accelerating everything about PowerShell. Anything I do, I just pop it into one of those AI, ChatGPT mostly, and how can I do this? Is this possible? And the answer with PowerShell is almost always yes. So, it's such an accelerator, and the things that I can do with it now, combining all of that, is just kind of insane, kind of unlimited. So it's a little scary too, because I'm getting to that point where at first I thought that I understood PowerShell, but I forget what that curve is called. Where
it's not Balmer's Peak, but yeah,
one of those where now I know that PowerShell is so much bigger than I previously thought, and there's so much more to learn, and that's pretty scary and pretty exciting at the same time.
The Valley of Despair, I think, is what they call that the Dunning-Kruger effect thing.
Yeah.
The more you know, the more you know you don't know.
Exactly.
So I think we all go through that journey, though. So it's cool that you're aware of sort of where you are in it. There's always going to be more to learn, but from what I've seen, you've learned a lot about PowerShell and the different projects, the different applications, and the different sort of mechanisms within it. What about IoT stuff? Why are you interested in that? Because I've seen you sort of flourish in that space.
Yeah. So I don't know if you remember the Johnny Five movie, the Short Circuit movie a while back. You don't remember that?
No.
Johnny Five.
Some people do, though.
And there's the Data from the Goonies, and there's this movie called Blank Man. I don't know if you remember that. Did you ever see that, Blank Man? Kind of old, obscure movies. Yeah. But the main thing is all of those guys, they're sort of, IoT stuff, electronic stuff, kind of inventions and Rube Goldberg type of mechanisms that are kind of just fun to play with. And up until kind of interesting, actually, because recently, in the past few years, I feel that microcontrollers and electronics, consumer electronics, and if you want to get into the just microcontroller space, things are so much more accessible now. Back in the days, I felt like I couldn't afford it, and there was something about it that was enticing, but also unreachable for me at the time. But nowadays, with the internet and AI, and it's just so easy to get to now. You want to do something, it's right there. And so that's why, like you said, recently I've been flourishing, quote unquote, And it's mostly because of that. There's a lot of resources online now, the Adafruit, SparkFun, forums, what have you. It's just, there's so much information that it's really easy to just buy stuff on Amazon, some of these knockoff, like ESP32s, those kind of chips and boards. And you can just get started. It's so easy. There's so many guides and walkthroughs nowadays.
Nice. If you were to advise someone who's like, okay, cool, I can use PowerShell to move things and connect little circuit boards and little controllers and things like that, but I want to get started, what's a good place to get started? What's a good sort of entry point?
So there was actually a project with .NET IoT. It was, unfortunately, I think it was retired back in June 2024, or it was archived. I don't think they're not really working on it too much anymore. But there's a big .NET IoT library, actually, and there's something called Nano Frameworks, where it is basically it's .NET and IoT. So because it's .NET, we can also use PowerShell, right? And so I was just playing around with that and combining some of the things from Python world, the MicroPython, CircuitPython world, and some tips from there, and some of the stuff from the .NET IoT project on GitHub. I was able to get some motors moving, have PowerShell display text onto a little SSD 1306 little OLED display. So, I mean, I'm still just at the beginning of my journey, but it feels like, man, I can do so much with this stuff. And
that is fun.
Yeah. And I'm starting to kind of, the more I mess with this stuff, the more I can understand how our smart, what do you call them? The smart IoT, our smart devices at home, how they work, how they connect to the internet, and the sensors that they have. And they're actually pretty simple. So it's kind of easy to just recreate some of those things. For example, I don't know, this guy right here. This thing, a buddy of mine sent me a little birthday present, and it has this thing embedded in it. It was like a little book that it flips open and it starts playing music. I took out the battery so it won't play. But now that I've kind of messed around with IoT stuff, I can see the circuitry in there and the little chips where the firmware could be. And maybe I can take a look into that, connect into it, and see what it does, and maybe make it play on a different sound. Maybe Andrew Plog greeting me every morning or something.
That's fun because I think I talk about that, but I've never done the IoT thing. But I like anything in PowerShell that sort of brings it to life. Typically for me, that's been through a GUI or a TUI or something like that. But I can see IoT stuff being a bit more exciting because it's like real world in front of you kind of thing. And you could use that to come up with like, I think there's whole YouTube channels on it, like stupid little inventions and machines that can do things. Some are helpful. Sometimes you can just do it just to learn. And it sounds like you're able to learn a whole bunch about IoT and how things actually work in the real world, sort of through that process, which is kind of like what PowerShell is all about. So it's pretty awesome.
Exactly. There's a lot of similarities, a lot of parallels. So, and yeah, it's pretty simple to be honest. I don't want to intimidate anybody, but really, if you want to get into IoT and PowerShell and .NET, it's not as hard as it seems, and you really got to get into it. Just get into it and start playing with it, and hopefully, this little module that I'm trying to put together, hopefully, I can finish it at some point, and then it'll be that much easier. And my code is nothing complex at all, so I'm sure I'll try to put in as many comments as I can as possible, and then that way it'll be easy to follow. Yeah.
Nice. Okay, so people are listening to this. They're like, okay, IoT sounds fun. I have a Raspberry Pi that I've had forever. I got the little extra package that came with it with the little breadboard and all that. Am I using the right term? It's called like a breadboard or something?
Breadboard is one of these. One of these guys, the little...
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a breadboard.
Yeah. So
But
say
you're probably talking about one of these microcontroller boards, right?
I never had one of those, I don't think.
Yeah. So this is the ESP32 board, one of the different variants of it, and they're pretty cheap. You can actually get in some cases like $5 each one of those if you buy it in a bundle. So they're really not that expensive at all.
So you're a tinkerer, you're a builder, because you're also a big 3D printer, and I think those two hobbies kind of pair well.
Yeah, no, they really do. So I guess now is a good time to maybe segue into my background a little bit more and how that all came about. So yeah, so I spent 20 years in the Navy and I learned a lot of things along the way. I did mostly medical in the Navy, so I was what's known as a corpsman, essentially the Navy equivalent of the Army medic, if that makes more sense to people, right? They don't know what a corpsman is. Not a lot of people know what a corpsman is, but an Army medic is much more familiar. So basically, imagine you get sent out to combat. You got a bag of medical equipment and supplies, and you've got to figure out how to save lives with just a bag and whatever you can stuff in your cargo pants, right? Whatever you can carry with you, that's all you have. And every time you use it, that's it. Who knows when you're going to get replenished? Who knows when you can get more stuff? So you got to be super resourceful. You got to figure out how to use things as efficiently as possible. How to not waste anything. So, and that has always been a big part of my outlook on things. You got to be efficient. You gotta find the quickest way from point A to point B, kind of thing. So I hate waiting for things. So if I want something, and I can build it myself according to my specifications, I'll find a way to do it. And now more than ever, 3D printing, these microcontrollers, and the information that you can get out of the internet and any kind of AI resources nowadays, it's a kind of a dream come true for me at this point. I'm really liking where we're going.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I like the efficiency play. And thank you for your service. 20 years is quite the time, but I want to explore that a little bit because you and I know each other a little bit. We've had a few conversations, so I do know a little bit about your journey. I want to hear sort of how you ended up leaving the Navy and ending up in PowerShell. Can you explore that a little bit?
From the Navy, but the connection between the Navy and PowerShell?
Yeah, like why you ended up eventually leaving.
Oh, well, you got to retire after some point. Like there's a time limit. At the time when it's changed a little bit now, but during my time, it was 20 years you can retire. So you actually have to ask permission to retire. So I asked the Navy, they said, that's fine, you can retire, cool. But a few years before that, I was in a classroom and a Navy chief asked the room who was staying in the Navy, right? Kind of who's staying in the Navy, who's going to be a lifer. I raised my hand because I thought, hey, I'm staying in the Navy I'm going to ride this as long as possible. And then he said, you can't stay in the Navy. And that kind of, the little record scratch moment for me. And he said, you're going to have to get out. The Navy's going to end. You're going to need a plan B. So at that point, my mind started to race. Like, what am I good at? What do I want to do? Where do I see myself in like 5 years? Because at the time, it was about 5 years before my 20-year mark. So I started panicking a little bit, actually, because as much as I liked my job in the Navy, I really couldn't see myself doing that for longer than like another couple of years. So, and then I thought about it, and I remember that I really enjoyed being just a big nerd. I wanted to transition into IT somehow, and I found some opportunities where I had to build an application using Microsoft Access and VBA, right? So that was really fun. I really enjoyed that. They're actually still using that system right now that I built in 2018. So that's kind of a proud moment for me. and I made some connections with the right people, and they saw my potential and they took a chance, and then they hired me on. So I became a system admin when I got out. Yeah, and then there was a specific moment where we had to figure out how to collect data from a bunch of remote devices, IoT medical devices, and we had to get the firmware version and some other things like IP, MAC address, and firmware. And then we had to, just depending on the information, we had to update specific ones. So I looked for different ways to do it, and everything online was saying either like Linux or PowerShell. So we're a Windows Microsoft shop, so Linux was out of the question, and it was PowerShell. And I saw some scripts. I saw some. There was this interesting blog article. Right, kudos to everybody who writes blogs. Appreciate you guys. So somebody wrote an article about how to speed up pings, and by pinging something, you can actually get the MAC address. So it was like test connection versus test net connection versus some kind of using .NET async to ping. And I tried all of those, and I was just amazed. Like, wait, you can do different things. You can do the same thing, but different ways in PowerShell, right? So, and depending on what you need, maybe this one's better, this one's better. And at the time, I didn't know how to write functions yet. And once I had enough of a script, and then I could start doing for each loops. And then I said, how do I keep calling this? Then I started looking into functions, and I was like, so within a couple of weekends, I was able to create a script that would spit out a CSV of all of those remote devices with their IP addresses, with their MAC addresses, and then use plink.exe to connect to those devices and extract from text their firmware versions. And I was like, I was hooked at that point. This is the kind of stuff I can do with PowerShell. What else can I do?
Wow. And that was like pretty early on into your actual career journey, right? Or IT career, I should say.
That was within 4 months after I became a system admin.
That's rather impressive.
But I've always been a big nerd, though. Like I've always messed around with computers.
Okay.
Yeah, I've always had. I've been messing around with Raspberry Pis. Trying to set up my own home lab, that kind of stuff. I run my own little server, so it's really nothing new. But that was the first time that I really engaged with PowerShell, and I was hooked. At that point, I ate up everything that I could find about PowerShell. Looked into the Monad manifesto, like where did this come from? Who created this? And then within a few weeks of that, like, are there any podcasts about this? And then I found you and Jordan, and you guys kept me company every morning during my commutes.
Wow. Do you have any favorite podcasts from over the years?
I mean, all the Chrissy ones are always good.
Oh,
and then the Jeffrey Snover is always good.
Yeah, Double Bird. Love that.
When Jordan left, that was a sad day.
That was a sad day.
Yeah. Dan Schroeder.
Dan's great.
James Brundage.
Can learn a lot from him.
I mean, there's a lot, man. Like you guys, every Monday, Tuesday, I listen to the podcast and just kind of see if there's any inspiration. And usually 9 times out of 10, and then I message you. Usually I'm like, yeah, man, you got me hyped up again. Can't do this every week. Stop hyping me up.
Yeah, is that how you met? We said like, hey, reach out if you need something or want to talk, and then you reached out. Was that how we initially met?
No, it was PDQ, the Discord.
The Discord. Okay, cool.
Yeah,
Discord.gg/PDQ.
Yeah, I finally decided to jump on and kind of mess around. And met your friends, Micah, Alex, Marcy, Marcel, and the poor Padawan, whatever his name is.
Old PS now.
Yeah. Cool guys. And Tara.
Tara's awesome. It's a fun little community we got going on there. Cool. And then we sort of kicked it off and had several convos since. Pretty much anytime someone reaches out to me, they're like, "Oh, I love the PowerShell podcast." I'm trying to make some connections, see how I can connect you with where you're trying to go, or at the very least get some feedback on what I can be doing better. And it's not only like a one-way street. It's so invigorating for me to see someone like you who's consuming the podcast and then going out and living the things that you're hearing about. You're not just idly sitting by. You're taking some next steps to grow. And when you do that, I get the benefit of getting to watch you flourish like a flower or whatever. It's we all go through that sort of process, and we're all at different levels of flourishing in different ways. But when you become part of that community and get those connections, it's so fun to watch everyone sort of having their own success story, and we're all at different levels and we're all in it together. It's far more enjoyable than feeling like you're swimming upstream by yourself. So appreciate you reaching out.
Yeah, man. I've only benefited since then, so can't really thank you. I do have to say though, there is recently my organization they did a survey for our system admins, and I guess trying to figure out what we want, what we need, etc. And do you want to guess what the number one thing was? What they wanted to learn more about, or to learn more about? You want to guess?
I'm hoping it's PowerShell.
Yeah, it's PowerShell.
Wow.
It's PowerShell. It was wild. I mean, I'm
Nice.
not surprised. I'm not surprised, right? Again, we're a Windows shop or Microsoft shop, so the things you can do with Microsoft Windows and PowerShell, and now since it's cross-platform, a bunch of other things too. So there is definitely an appetite to learn more PowerShell, and I'm confused sometimes. I don't know what it is that intimidates people. The GUI warriors. Nothing wrong with a good GUI, but some people are just intimidated with a terminal, with a shell.
I think it comes from, it can come from a bunch of different things, but kudos to the people who get that initial fear and they're like, "Oh my gosh, this can be overwhelming. Typing commands, I've never done this before." But whenever you're able to actually push through that and try and decipher a thing here or there, keep deciphering things, all of a sudden you can make sense out of it. But yeah, there is that tendency for people to sort of be pretty standoffish and want to get away from it. At least some orgs.
Yeah. Another thing that I learned in the Navy during my time in the military is there's always going to be groups of people or fractions of a group. So generally it's about 20, 60, 20, right? So I find that out of a group, about 20% will be your go-getters, your high achievers. And those are the ones that you can rely on, that are just self-motivated. And then the other 60%, they're okay, they show up. And then the bottom 20%, they're kind of the problem children, if you will. They take up most of the time and resources just trying to get them straight. But so I'm hoping to connect with those top 20. I think I've joined a community where I found my people, so to speak, in my organization. I found my PowerShell people, and there's a lot of excitement. It's a lot of sharing, and I keep talking about this one, especially the Jeffrey Snover episode. Man, I was blasting it. And
Nice.
I want to. There is, remember this Hey Scripting guy blog series? Yeah. So there is a guy. His name is Mark. Also, Mark with a C. Mark Carter. I had no idea that I was using his blog. There was something he had a blog article about how to quickly get a list or get an output of all of the installed software using a registry versus what's the other one?
Win32 product.
Yeah, instead of that one, right? Because that one's kind of slow. Getting it through the registry is a lot quicker. So I was looking for a better way, and I found his article from the Hey Scripting guy, and I've been using that. I've been using that in my scripts and stuff. And at some point, I was looking for different groups within the organization, and I found a PowerShell group started by someone else. And I reached out, and turns out it's Mark Carter. He's the guy who wrote that article from the Hey Scripting guy. He knows. He worked with Ed Wilson, the OG. And I didn't know that we were like, I was so, I was close to somebody that had so much history in the beginnings of PowerShell, back when they still had like regular PowerShell Saturdays, I guess, back in those days when Microsoft was still actively kind of pushing PowerShell. So
Yep.
yeah, I thought that was really cool to make that connection. And we met at a Power Apps or Power Platform conference. He flew over to the conference, and I was in town, so we met. He gave me some stickers. That was really cool, man. That was a cool experience.
That's awesome. I remember you messaged me. You're like, "Hey, I just found this guy works here," and I was like, "Oh, that's so cool." And then to hear that you are getting to meet him and stuff like that, and mention something about a user group. Do you do a PowerShell user group at work, or what kind of thing do you have going on with your group?
Yeah, I started one. Started a PowerShell user group at work.
You started one. Whoa! Congrats!
A while back.
Nicely done.
It's on pause, I think. Yeah, I kind of try to gauge the community. Not a whole lot of. I got about 60 plus initial interest, but I don't know, either time or just opportunity. Not a whole lot of people showed up. The same, maybe 6 or 8, and over time that also petered out. So it didn't feel right at the moment.
Yeah.
And at the time, I was still fairly new at PowerShell. I think I was like a year into it at the time. So I was really excited to bring people together using PowerShell, but I could feel that I was hitting my limits too.
Yeah.
And looking back, some of the things that I was saying, some of the things that I was trying to teach them was probably not correct. So that's part of it, where I was thinking, hey, let me put this on pause, learn some more, and then and try to figure out if there's another better time. But yeah,
That's wise.
I feel like there's a little bit of energy nowadays. Recently, there's a few people have reached out and asked me about it. So I'm thinking it might be time to bring it back.
Nice. New year. Get the group started up again. What cadence were you doing before? How often were you meeting? What cadence? How often were you meeting before? Monthly or?
It was I don't remember. Was it every week?
Oh, okay.
No. Yeah, no. Once a month on like the second Wednesday or something.
Okay. Gotcha. Yeah, but man, I went through kind of a similar experience where I was like, got some interest, kind of went a little too hard with it, and was like not teaching the right things, and it didn't end up. And then gave it like 6 months, figured some stuff out. My tooling matured, my understanding matured, and I kind of restarted things up. And I was able to give a little bit more value and be a little bit more constructive with it. So curious to see how this ends up for you. But hey, kudos on you for stepping out there and trying to create something and trying to have an impact. And it sounds like successfully having an impact on the culture in a positive way to spread PowerShell, which is sort of the goal, right? And it sounds like you're learning along the way. No one expects anyone to be perfect.
Yeah. And my supervisor, Mike, actually, he asked me recently, like, why I network, why something about I have a tendency to try to reach out to people and try to make connections, right? And I never really thought about it. And so when he asked me, I had to stop and think, like, why do I do that? It's not necessarily something that I would want to do. I'm sort of an introvert in a way, but I've taught myself how to network. And 20 years in the Navy, I'm going to have a lot of Navy stuff. Somebody in the Navy told me, network to get work. And I've been thinking about that. And essentially what they taught me is I got to network so I can take care of my sailors, right? And by making these connections with people and learning things and making myself exposing myself out there, making myself known, that sort of makes these processes that I'm trying to do, these projects that I have, that what's the word? What's the phrase? Like grease the wheels, I guess, and it makes things work better. So initially, it was about taking care of my sailors, but now I'm taking care of my customers, and I've learned to kind of enjoy the process as well. And I mean, I'm here networking with you, networking with all the fun people in the Discord chat or server, and
Yeah.
I'm learning from you guys. So I take back whatever I learn, and then I make little fun things for my team that we can use and make our jobs easier. So in a way, I'm still taking care of my sailors, except my sailors are civilians now.
Dang, man, that's a mature way to look at it. So, Mark, I want to ask you some of your favorite modules. What are they? Give me two. I'll save one for the end.
I don't really have a whole lot of I don't use a lot of modules, to be honest. I
You
mean, I
sent
use
me a huge list.
yeah, but I don't use them as much.
Oh,
The Active Directory is probably Active Directory module by
yeah.
Microsoft. That's probably the one that I use the most, since we're a Microsoft shop. But PSReadLine, my favorite, obviously. I feel naked without it. Whenever I open a new, or whatever I use in a different computer that doesn't have the latest PSReadLine, it feels weird, feels awkward. So that's by far my favorite. It just does a lot for my workflow. The other thing that the other module that I like is the Dan Schroeder's TIPS, TIPS. That one, I just like it because it sparks a lot of, it inspires me every time I get one of those tips. I read it, I'm like, oh, I can do that? Oh, let me try it right now. How else can I use it? So thank you, Dan Schroeder. And because I like colors, Posh by James Brundage and the terminal icons by Brandon Olin. So those ones, I just like them because they make my terminal look pretty. But I don't really have a whole lot of modules that I rely on a day in, day out. I have some honorable mentions if you want me to go through those.
I was reading your honorable mentions, and they make me think that, goodness gracious, you've used PowerShell in a number of ways. But yeah, what are these honorable mentions? There's some good ones.
So yeah, PSDiscoveryProtocol by Lahell, I believe. I just thought it was interesting how we could use PowerShell to get switch information from packets. In some cases, VLAN in there. We can get VLAN switch information, what port it's on, by using the either LDP or CDP protocol. I was mind blown when I figured that out. When somebody from the PDQ Discord shared that. We were having a discussion there, and somebody pointed that out. So I tried it, and it works, and it helps me in my day-to-day, where if I can't find the device, but I can figure out where the switch is, and so then I can locate the switch. It's somewhere nearby, right? So that's really helpful, instead of just a device somewhere in the wired network. KBUpdate, Chrissy Lemaire, obviously, it's a fun little module. I use that occasionally I use that to download, instead of going to the website and downloading the what do you call them, the WSUs, those files, the KB files. I just use that, and it's a lot more fun for me. PS2EXE, that occasionally people still don't know how to run my PS1 files, so making it into an exe is a lot simpler. Sometimes I use WSF also, but the exe file just makes more sense for most people. Selenium, I'm starting to mess around with Selenium, trying to automate some of instead of opening a link, clicking a couple of times, putting in my username, password, clicking a few more buttons, and then finally getting to the resource that I need. I've been playing around with Selenium. Just run a function, it does everything for me, and then I just get directly to work, right? Saves me a good amount of time. And then SQLite by Warren Frame. I'm trying to learn more about SQL and kind of incorporating that into my functions. Working on a little application now for cybersecurity, and I want to be able to save a lot of that data into an SQLite database. So playing around with that's pretty fun. Instead of a whole server and having to connect to that, it's just a file. So that's neat. Once I get better at PowerShell, I want to learn how to use Pester effectively and kind of test my scripts. And then PS Framework and Stucco and Plaster, I want to learn more about those and how to just make my PowerShell that much more stronger and more effective and templated, I guess, and much more consistent. That's the word I'm looking for, consistent. Because right now, if you take my scripts, you wouldn't know that I wrote like all of them, because each one would have a different personality depending on how I felt that day. So I really need to be more consistent, and think a little bit more like a developer.
That's a good call. I was talking to
a lot of modules.
a lot of modules, but there's some great ones there. And I think you highlighted initially the importance of, if you know that a module exists to do something, you can all of a sudden do that something. And that was what you found with PSDiscoveryProtocol. Without knowing about that, you had no clue that PowerShell could be used for. And PowerShell can be used for so many different things. Oftentimes, it's just about finding if there's a pre-existing module that exists, or you got to know how you can use it from PowerShell. It can be easier in some instances than others. But I wanted to highlight something about PS Framework you mentioned you wanted to learn about, and also kind of some of the other modules like the Plaster stuff. In the interview I did recently with Fred, which I'm sure you'll listen to once it comes out, which actually at the time of this recording, it is out. So in the recent interview with Fred, we talked about how a big secret to him being able to develop so much, because I don't know if you've looked at his stuff, but he's one of those top PowerShell developers out there. But one of the secrets is that the time it takes him to go from pen to paper, or from like idea to code written, is very low. His tool set is very, very mature. And I think you'll find that for anyone who's producing at a very high level. They have that templating on point. They have their PSReadLine, all their little shortcuts, all that stuff is fine-tuned and ready to go. And it sounds like you are ready to keep heading down that track, and you might find some exponential growth along the way when you kind of get not only the process matured, but also your comfortability with it and your ability to like recall exactly what to do. Oh my gosh. Imagine what you're going to be up to in a couple of years.
Yeah, man. I don't know, but it's for sure. It's going to be a fun journey.
Right.
Yeah, there's a few things too in VS Code. I mean, nowadays, right? Most of us are using VS Code. I still know some people that use the PowerShell ISE. Some people think that PowerShell ISE is PowerShell.
Yeah.
When I tell people, hey, open a PowerShell, that's the one that they open, PowerShell ISE. And I have to stop them and say, that's not what I mean. Open just PowerShell, no ISE. And so within VS Code, there's a bunch of things too, extensions and little modifications you can do to the config to fit your environment, make your environment fit you. So that's what I want to say. So yeah, that's a big part of it, is learning your environment, tweaking it so it works for you, and then not panicking when you use a different computer.
Yes. Oh, that's good. I want to give a shout out to my old friend, the .vs code folder. I don't know if you've explored it yet, but check it out.
No, but I've heard you talking about it on the podcast. Are you a Git folder or a VS Code folder kind of guy?
It's .vs. Either of them are great, but I like to start people off with .vs code, because usually source control and like GitHub is a step after that. Did you say .git or .github?
.github, yeah.
Okay, yes.
I don't use either one of those, so I wouldn't know, but I've heard you talking about it.
The thing is what you're experiencing is what everyone experiences. Oh, I can do this to make things better, and this and this. There's just so many things that you could do to make things a little bit better. That's a little overwhelming for me, at least. That's why on the podcast sometimes I talk about like we're building that roadmap of like all the things that exist, and then you can go and explore them all. Like, I don't know, it can just be pretty daunting, I think. But as time goes on, you're able to kind of knock those off, and all of a sudden you've done a ton of stuff.
Yeah, and I've definitely experienced that. The sort of the little panic in the back of my head, like there's so much. So I've been able to sort of help myself, not completely, but somewhat, by just figuring out what works for me as far as documentation goes. So Markdown, learning Markdown is huge. It's super quick, super simple. Just whatever I learn, I'll start typing it up in a little Markdown file. And there's been a few moments where I'll look up a folder and I don't recognize the script, even though I swear I wrote it 2 weeks ago. I don't recognize it. But then I'll find my little README file and I'll start reading that. And I'm like, okay, I see what I did. And yeah, just documentation, super important. Still trying to get to a really good, consistent pace with it. But that's what I want to, when people reach out to me and say, hey, I want to learn PowerShell, you're our local PowerShell guru, apparently. That's one of the things that I tell them, hey, learn how to document what you learn. And then you can refer to that. You can reference that later, and it'll hopefully bring back a lot of that memory that you kind of, as you learn more and more about PowerShell. I feel like some of that stuff, from the primary memory gets shoved back into the backup memory, and that's what the README files do, is help you remember and connect the dots again.
Sometimes we don't need to learn, we need to remember.
Exactly. There's just too much to learn. Yeah, we don't have enough of that RAM in our brains to just remember everything right at the front. So
meanwhile, you go ahead.
No, go ahead. Yeah, offloading it into a README file with Markdown is just super useful, and uploading it to like GitHub, GitLab, wherever, somewhere that you can access. Man, that's helped me out so many times.
Dude, you've seen the light. You're on the right path. This is again, I said this a couple times, but if you were a stock, man, I'm investing. And I had the other thought, gosh, I don't think it'll probably happen, but it would be very fun to work with you at some point in our careers if the paths ever cross, because you're very creative and problem solving oriented. Oh, what's that on your wall?
Nothing.
Future coworker.
Yeah. No, actually, I didn't talk about that. Have you ever heard of Lean Six Sigma?
It sounds really familiar, but no.
Yeah, Lean Six Sigma. That's something that the Navy pushed me towards back in 2006. 2006. Mm-hmm. They put me in a class for Lean Six Sigma. I had no idea. I didn't really care for it, but once I got into class, it was all about process improvement, continuous process improvement. And man, that was a game changer for me. There's their acronym that I still remember and I still use to this day is DMAIC: define, measure, analyze, implement, control. Right? Like I can still spit it out like I just learned it last week. Yeah, so I still use that, and it's one of the things that I love about PowerShell. It's such a great tool for continuous process improvement, because you can pull logs, you can collect information, you can create functions and reuse functions. It's such a great tool. Yeah, so there's a big connection, for me at least, there's a big connection between continuous process improvement and PowerShell and Lean Six Sigma.
Dang. So I had not heard of that, or at least I hadn't explored it much. Might have heard it in passing. But
I think it's evolved a little bit. Oh, sorry.
No, it's just pretty interesting to hear that that's sort of, I can see a lot of ways that they cross, which is even why I'm more exciting to see, like, once you sort of get into more open source a little bit more, get super comfortable with GitHub, like you can really start to implement that mindset and benefit from it. So I'm just personally a little selfishly curious to see how it shakes up for you.
Yeah, man.
Now,
you're gonna be with me the whole way, though.
Oh, that's right, Monday. Man. Every Monday, you know it, man. Worldwide, everywhere. And while we're at it, leave us a like, comment, subscribe, and a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or your podcast platform of choice. Mark, I already know you've done that. Thank you, man. But if you're just watching on YouTube, hit a thumbs up. Makes me warm and fuzzy inside. Spread PowerShell to the people. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
That's what we like to do around here. It's community vibes, man. But I want to say to you, man, thank you for sharing your story with us. I think a lot of people can relate to it. And thank you for being bold enough to try some of these things and to take these chances. But I don't think that's anything that's too new for you based on what I've heard about, 4 months in, you're doing this crazy IoT thing with PowerShell and all this. So you have a good head on your shoulders, man. And I think that at this point we can say confidently, you're not a PowerShell noob, man. You can't call yourself that. Sorry. You know too much.
Not enough. So much to learn.
What is a message that you have out there for the people?
Oh man. Okay.
Inspire
message
the masses.
To the people, to the masses. Yeah, just try it. Don't be afraid. Learn from making mistakes. I think that's a big part of it, is just try it, make mistakes, and just learn from that. And then just incrementally get better and better and better. And then just keep going.
Love it, Mark. Mark, you've said a lot of great things, and I have resonated with what you've said. I want to find you on the World Wide Web. Don't tell me where I can find you yet, because I know there's a few places. Is 2025 the year where we get a blog from Mark? Because some of this IoT stuff you're talking about, sure, it'd be sweet if I could read a couple paragraphs, copy paste a couple commands, kind of get started on my own. But what say you?
Oh man, I'm still fighting the consistency monster. I am so distracted with a lot of things. So I don't know. No promises.
Life comes first. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Let's not forget that.
Yeah, I agree though. I should write a blog for me mostly. And then if anybody else finds benefit out of it, then awesome.
Yep.
But yeah, I should do it for me.
Yeah, exactly. You already have the code, right? So just, talk through it just like you did here, basically. Because literally I would dig out my old Raspberry Pi, copy paste a few commands, and then eventually like kind of get into things and leave the blog behind. But it just gives people another opportunity to sort of create your own maybe sub community of IoT people, and then you see something else, and you never know what doors you can open.
Okay.
You got a couple. I saw at least one trick you had up your sleeve. Is there anything you want to show us? I saw there was a little LCD or LED screen thingy you had there. What's going on? You got secrets?
Do we have time for, I guess, a little
demo?
Time,
man. You're Mark, okay. Man. We bend the rules. We break them. All right. Long-time listener, first-time caller. We got to make a little bit of time for the gizmos and gadgets.
All right. Work in progress. And I guess this is for the video watchers, right?
Video watchers. That's right. You got to check it out on YouTube. Link in the show notes.
Switch. All right.
Oh, my gosh. And was this written with PowerShell? And there's multi-colors, multi-line.
Yeah. Actually.
Wow. And what did you type in?
There's a little function in there. I prepared it just for you. So every time I type Andrew, it refreshes the little display.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. That's the most amazing, man.
Let me see. So there it is. So this is a demo that I kind of prepared. So essentially the plan is to load all the .NET IoT libraries, and then see if I can display and monitor my memory usage out of this SSD 1306 OLED display. So here we go. Let's see what happens. So if there's any kind of device connected earlier, it's going to try to clear it out. And here it is. Oh, there's an error, but that's fine. There you go.
Wow.
So kind of, yeah. That's just, I could maybe set up a few of these, each one doing a specific task. So this one is monitoring how much memory I'm using, and it refreshes every second, as you can see. All right, so this is an example, all written in PowerShell.NET. It's an example of how we can connect PowerShell and use it in the physical world.
Right. That is actually so sweet. Because a lot of times, we can use APIs to connect to things that some other company created or some other team created. But sometimes with something like this, you can be that extra prong into the real world to get things going. That's sort of, I've never thought in that way. So for me, that's a little newer. And I can see why this is sort of taking you over. And you've had
so an interesting, you kind of need a specific board for this. The FTDI FT232SH, and I was struggling with it for a minute because there really is no way to sort of script the specific device without knowing its serial. Like you have to figure out what the serial is and then use that in a script, like specify what that device is. But FTDI, they have a little utility called ft underscore prog that I found. You can actually modify the EEPROM on the chip, the little bit of memory that's on the chip. And you could specify a description and you could assign a prefix to the serial. So by doing that, we can essentially name the device and categorize it, right? So I think that was a breakthrough moment for me for this little project, because now if I can specify a prefix like a DS, for example, for display to a serial, then I can use PowerShell and pull up the P&P entities and filter for that. And now I know that I have a PS Gadget display device connected, right? So that's neat that FTDI, I can't remember what they're called, their full acronym, but for them to allow us to modify the EEPROM like that's really handy, and it's going to be useful for these kind of projects.
Nice. Well, I'd have to talk to you in the future, man. I don't know if 2 to 2:30 p.m. Eastern time works for you, but I'd love to have you on a PowerShell Wednesday to explore some of these tools if you're ever free at that time.
Yeah.
We'll take the answer off air. No pressure, man.
Yeah. Wait, what is that?
You don't know about PowerShell Wednesdays?
Is that on PDQ?
Yeah, it's on the PDQ Discord. Every single Wednesday, I host a PowerShell lunch and learn. You know, some people aren't able to go home and do after hours things. They got other responsibilities, stuff going on. So I wanted to create one that's sort of in the middle of the day, at least for sort of US based folks. But I wanted to create something during the day, 30 minutes every single week, though. We're going to build some awesome community. There's people who are advanced. There's people who are brand new. Everyone is welcome, including you, Mark.
Yeah, that'd be, the past couple of maybe 2-3 weeks, I've been busy with working on this project, as well as another cybersecurity like GUI PowerShell based project, learning a lot about WPF. So I know I've been kind of absent on the Discord, but I remember reading about that a little bit. So I'm not sure what that is, but hey, man, if you're in charge of it, if you're leading it, I'm sure it's a good thing, and I'll be there with you, bro.
It was fun, man. Today, Fred came by. He talked about VS Code and PowerShell and some of his projects, and it's pretty impressive. But, well, thank you for joining me, man. Where can people find you on the internet? They love what you've said. Yeah, there's going to be links to all this in the show notes, but where can people find you? Because you are a cool guy, man. I got to say it.
LinkedIn is really the only place. LinkedIn and what's the other one? What's that new thing?
Discord?
Blue Sky. Dave Carroll, Blue Sky. Yeah. I know Dave Carroll's been pushing Blue Sky quite a bit.
Wait,
so
Dave Carroll's on Blue Sky?
I joined, and I didn't realize how big the PowerShell community is in there. So Blue Sky, I don't even remember. I don't remember what my name is on Blue Sky, but I guess LinkedIn, that's the official one.
Sweet. Yeah, LinkedIn is where I'm at as well. And I guess you're not on Discord if people wanted to bother you there.
Oh, sure.
Oh, you're on Discord? Android T38, if you want to hit him up on Discord. You know, people are on Discord often, so I figured I'd throw it out there. You can check him out on Discord. Well, thank you, Mark, for joining me. It was a pleasure speaking with you, man. Glad we got to do this. Dude, we've been talking about this for a while, and hey, it made sense, man. We're here.
Yeah, the time is right, I guess.
That's right. Well, thank you, everybody out there. Walk safe, drive safe, whatever you're doing, do it safe. I don't know why I started saying this, man, but I do want everyone to be safe, and everyone says they drive, so do it safely. Don't look this stuff up while you're driving, but check out the show notes for everything we talked about here today, and join us for PowerShell Wednesdays. That's discord.gg/PDQ every single Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern time. That's noon Mountain time. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the PowerShell Podcast. The PowerShell Podcast is a PDQ production, making device management simple, secure, and pretty damn quick.